Day 22 of the rotation began with a flat C and a noise in the pipes. Dr. Lena Park logged it at 0417. She wrote the same words she had written 5 nights in a row. Tonal intrusion through intake line. Unknown source. The sound was faint, a braided hum tucked into the throb of the generators. When she leaned close to the bulkhead in the acoustic lab, it pressed through her jawbone and teeth. Pelagic Array Station Theta sat in the mid-ocean gyre, a research platform anchored to a steel lattice that dove 100 meters to the seabed. A moon pool cut the main deck. An observation dome bulged from the lower level. 16 people lived and worked in the blocky white habitat. They studied currents, microplastics, whale migrations, and the thin food web that carried life through thousands of meters of water. Lena was the station's bioacoustician. She mapped whale songs and ship noise, turned raw pressure into spectrograms, and made guesses that might become facts. At 0505, she tagged the initial maintenance team with the note and climbed the ladder to the control room. Chief Malik was there with his coffee and his stitched-on calm scanning weather. Diver Riva Orm leaned on the chart table, suit half, on, dark hair in a twist. "The hum again?" Riva asked. "Same band. Low. Stable. It's coming up the intake." "It's always the intake," Riva said. "I'll check the screen." "I want the pole camera on you," Malik said. "Tie off at the forward stanchion. Harpoons are not on the menu." Riva snorted, zipped the suit, and headed for the airlock. She and her partner, Sato, quiet, patient, always early, were in the water by 0530. The rest of the station woke up one room at a time. Cook Miguel banged pans. Engineer Jonah ran diagnostics. Medic K. Huang sorted first aid packets and eyed the log for trouble. The feed from Riva's helmet cam filled a panel in control. Lena watched the zigzag of ladder rungs, the soft explode of bubbles, the green blur as Riva cleared the turbulence near the moon pool and moved into open water. The station floated like a steel seed in endless water. Lamps along the lattice made islands of brightness. Riva steadied herself at the intake column while Sato held the tether and logged temperatures. "Screen's clear," Riva said. "No kelp, no jellyfish. Looks new." "It is new," Jonah said over intercom. "I changed it last month." "Then the noise has manners. It's haunting, but it's tidy." Lena calibrated her spectrum view, trying to see order inside the hum. The frequency wavered. It did not look like a pump fault or the long sweep of a whale. It was regular, and it was being made on purpose. Riva froze. "Hold." "What is it?" Malik asked. Something moved beyond the beam. Sato panned, his light. The water glowed with plankton. The lattice bars fell away into dark. Far out, a shadow slipped past the edge of light. The lamps flickered as if the power had been pinched. "Riva, return," Malik said. "On it." She pushed off, the column. The tether jerked. The line in Sato's glove went slack, then tight, then slack again. The camera showed a smear of bubbles, a flash of silver and static. The channel filled with torn, wet sound. "Riva?" Malik said. "Riva, report." Silence snapped closed like a lid. They pulled in the tether hand over hand. The last meter came up empty. The cut was clean. Sato climbed out shaking. He stared at the free end of the line. "It didn't catch," he said, trying to give the world a simple story. "It cut." Malik shut the station. Hatches secured. Exterior lights on full. No one went outside. They searched with the ROV until noon. The only trace was a glove drifting in the lattice, the tips crushed flat. "Shark," Jonah said, because saying something helped him get through sentences. "No," Lena said. She knew the shapes of shark attacks in video. This had happened at the edge of a light field with no struggle and no blood. She carried her certainty to the wrong place and felt shamed by it. But she could not make herself say shark. The hum in the intake did not stop. The station was a town with corridors. Without Riva, noise divided the rooms into careful islands. At dinner, the crew spoke about the weather and did not use her name. Some had known her for Years, some had meant to. The ocean pressed against the hull with its usual patience. At 23:40, Lena went back to the lab. She ran the audio again. She took a clean clip and split it into threads. A pattern rose, a set of thin overtones locked to the hum. It was not whale, not ship, not pump. When she sped it up tenfold, the bine wobble turned into syllables that almost meant something. She slowed it back down. The meaning went back to the edge of thought. She put her ear to the bulkhead. The sound worked through bone conduction and skin. It would be impossible to sleep near the intake room. At 02:08, engineer Jonah Culver told the night watch he was going to check a breaker that had tripped twice, in the machine room. He was careful and slow, loyal to process. 10 minutes later, the motion sensor near the moon pool saw movement. 15 minutes after that, Kay found Jonah face down in the pool with his hands sunk between grates meant to keep bodies out. They hauled him fast. Kay worked him, strict and fierce, and brought him back with a cough that ripped his throat raw. "Why were you out of harness?" she asked when he could speak. "I heard a voice," he said. He shook and wouldn't stop. "In the vents. It said my name. It was Riva." "Riva is gone," Malik said. Jonah swallowed and wept with his teeth clenched as if that would keep the sound small. "It was Riva," he said again, while water ran out of his hair. Lena checked the log for the intake hum. It had peaked at 02:15. By morning, rumors had their own gravity. The station wasn't built for grief. It had checklists for water leaks, electrical fire, pressure loss, but not for a diver cut out of her tether and a chief engineer who heard a dead colleague in the ducts. Everyone walked softer. Lena reviewed the previous month of audio. 4 weeks ago, the intake noise had been a normal drone. 2 weeks ago, a second tone appeared. 5 nights ago, it strengthened and went stable. The same night, 6 crew reported dreams about someone standing beside their bunks. The dreams had not been logged as out of the ordinary. She mapped the hum. The dominant band tracked migration paths of beaked whales in the archive, but the behavior was wrong. The source moved, around the station, favoring the down current side. The amplitude rose at night. It spiked when someone stood next to the moon pool. At lunch, the medic's hands shook, noticeable only to someone watching for tremble. Kay pushed the tray away. "I need sleep," she said. "I go to bed and the fan breathes at me." Malik announced a lockdown after sundown. "No external. Work until we have 2 clear days. Ear protection in the machine rooms. Buddy rule everywhere. No one alone, even to brush your teeth." "What do we say in the log?" Sato asked. "Equipment failure and an injury during recovery," Malik said, because he used words that would outlast a mood. "We wait for the weather and evac to line up. We don't add theater." Lena went back to the spectrogram. She stripped the E bass hum and listened only to the thin harmonics threaded through it. If she barely breathed, she could make out contours of voices. She heard a cadence that matched the way Riva said the station's name. She heard her own voice shape the word copy. The hair on her forearms rose again. She saved the file as Anomaly Harmonics A and walked 3 circuits of the lower deck, trying to move heat out of her body. When she passed the observation dome, she stopped. The dome looked into a blue that went on without end. That was the whole point of the place, to be useful in a part of the sea that never touched land. Noor, the graduate intern from Cairo, pressed, her face to the glass. "I didn't get to know her," Noor said without turning. "I kept thinking I had time." "We all did," Lena said. "Is it stupid that I'm angry more than sad?" Noor asked. "Sad is heavy. Anger gives me something to do. It's not stupid." Lena looked at the blurred picture of the station in the dome's reflection. "I'm angry too." Noor nodded, eyes bright in the blue light. "I keep hearing humming in the lights," she said. "It gets louder when I try not to hear it." "Everyone hears it," Lena said, and hoped it was true. That night the lights flickered 3 times. The intake hum swelled. The station groaned where the lattice met the hull. The mooring lines thrummed, thin as violin strings. At 01:22, the observation dome alarm tripped. When Malik reached it, the dome hatch stood open. The water level had risen 2 centimeters. Noor was gone. Lena bent over the hatch. The hum pressed up against her face. An impulse came over her to lean farther, then farther again, until she would be nose to water like a child at a scoop. She stepped back and gripped the rail hard enough to leave dents in her palm. They sealed the dome, swept every room, checked lockers and shafts. They found nothing. The station felt smaller by a third. By dawn, Miguel had stopped singing to himself. Sato had stopped speaking at all. "There is a recorder outside our skin," Lena wrote in her notes. "It listens for anything it can feed back to us. It does not need to be smart if it is patient. It uses our voices to build a ladder to us." She needed data that didn't come through the intake. She asked for a short ROV run around the station perimeter. The sea had settled. Malik approved, with every caveat written in his face. 20 minutes, he said to Sato. "Do not chase a noise. You are a camera on a string." Sato launched at 10:15. The ROV drifted along the lattice, panniers strapped with sonar pingers Lena had tuned. For a test, the hum leaked through the feed. Contact mics picked it up through the frame. Lena marked timings while Sato inched the vehicle toward the downcurrent side. The water there was clouded with plankton. The hum ticked up. A shadow slid over the lights. The camera auto-corrected, refocused, panned. Nothing in frame. The ROV rocked. Lena heard it through the feed, a thin melody laying itself over the hum. No words, just interval and breath. It was simple, and it felt larger than simple. The notes were built to fit a human mouth. Sato flinched backward in his seat. He took off his headset like it burned. "It is inside the phones," he said. "Keep the set on," Lena said. "It protects you more than it harms you." "It calls," he said, and his eyes were clear and frightened. They reeled the ROV in. The pingers logged a structure to the sound. Several sources, moving as a loose group. When the ROV reached the moon pool, the melody shifted into something close to the shape of the word open. After lunch, Malik started an evac plan no one believed would make the weather windows. He booked the only mini-sub within range and put the crew on a prep schedule. He did it to give the day shape. Kay tried to nap and came out angrier. "I can't stand the vents," she said. "I almost tore one off the wall." She tapped her fingers on the table, 4/4 beat. "Every time I stop moving, I hear it louder." "Then move," Malik said. "Move until you're tired enough to sleep." "I've never been that tired," Kay said. By evening, the sound threaded the air in the corridors so lightly you could deny it out of politeness. The comm panel in Lena's room clicked 3 times and whispered copy in her voice. She unplugged it and pulled the fuse and slept in the lab with a blanket over her shoulders and the monitors set to dim. Her fatigue sat on her shoulders like a wet coat. Noor's name came up in the galley, and then it didn't. Miguel put out food and forgot to eat. Jonah inspected the generator housings in circles until Malik told him to sit. Sato asked permission to say nothing for a day, and Malik nodded. Lena pulled every harmonic out of every scrap of audio and stitched them together. She knew better than to name a thing because names do work. But her mind kept dropping ancient words onto the spectrogram. Nerid. Marrow. She pressed back. She wrote sources and let the paper stay clean. The sources copied. Each day the melody grew more exact in human mouth shapes. It found Malik's voice and pressed it through the pipes softly, asking report. It tried Jonah's voice with ready. It tried Riva's with come. Among the crew, blame moved in quiet circuits. Someone had not checked a knot. Someone had opened a hatch. Someone had listened when they knew better. No one said these things aloud. They showed in set jaws and short answers. Late on day 25, Kay carried an armful of ear protectors down to the moon pool. "We should store them here in case anyone feels pulled," she told Lena, reasonable and kind. "I'll put a bin by the ladder." They were still talking when Kay leaned over the edge. The movement was smooth. She did not stiffen or make the telltale correction of someone catching herself in a mistake. She simply leaned. Lena was a step away and grabbed the back of Kay's coverall and pulled. Kay toppled backward and hit the deck hard and swore like a healthy person. "Don't come near this alone," Lena said, shaking. "I heard my brother," Kay said. "I know better. I still heard him." They put the bin by the ladder and locked it with a code. That night the song coiled through the hull like smoke. Lena stood in the lab and let the speakers play a filtered version at low volume so her head could learn the lines the way a fighter studies tape. She wrote a counter melody that didn't match words and didn't comfort. She mapped the tones to the station's PA. She wrote another counter line for underwater speakers. At 0309, the station speakers turned themselves on and played the word open in a braid of familiar voices. The relays clicked even with the master switch off. Miguel ran, cursing, and yanked the power bus. The song stopped. The intake hum kept, pulsing, steady, and patient. "We have to fight it," Jonah said in the morning meeting. "I can't stand doing nothing." "We'll fight it and we'll also do nothing," Malik said. "We will be extremely boring and we will survive by being boring." "Boring," Jonah rubbed his face. "I can't hear my own thoughts. The hum fills in my sentences." Lena showed them the plan. Turn the station into a speaker and push noise into the water. Block the melody with broadband sound. Use detuned tones to make the main intervals shake apart. Wear double protection, plugs and muffs. Move in pairs. "And if the sources come close?" Sato asked. "Then the current will carry the noise around them," Lena said. She didn't know if that was true, but it was the best thing she could give them. "And if they don't leave?" Kay asked. "Then we last long enough for the mini-sub," Malik said, still building a road under their feet with sentences. Miguel gripped the table. "I will cook loud," he said. They laughed because it was a good sentence and because laughing was a way to tell your body it was not prey. They set up at dusk. Jonah and Sato wired the PA to Lena's tones. Lena tuned the underwater speakers and clipped them to the lattice around the moon pool. Kay checked everyone's fits and harnesses. Malik watched the weather and his crew with the same tight gaze. The first broadcast turned the water around the station into a buzz. The hum tried to sit inside it and slid off. The melody pressed, in and frayed. It was not a victory. It was a stand. Shapes moved at the edge of the lights. They were the size of people and the not shape of anything that needed air. They never presented a full outline. Their movement read as intent, not animal. Sato flinched. Jonah held steady and watched the meters. An hour in, the intake tone split into 3 narrow lines. The melody shifted to a mode that pulled on Lena's lungs. The crew went still as the shapes came closer. "Hold," Malik said. "No one. Move to the edge." One of the shapes climbed the light field and thinned there, as if it had spread itself across the bright skin of the water. The melody moved into the intakes that cooled the lab racks. The numbers fluttered across a row of screens and went blank. Lena kept the underwater speakers running and felt her heart land unevenly. Kay made a small sound. She pressed her hands to her ears. "I can hear my mother in the high notes," she said. "Not yours," Lena said. "None of it is ours." "Do not tell me what is mine," Kay said, but she didn't move closer to the pool. She stood with her shoulder against a post, trembling. Sato's headset slipped. He pulled off the muffs. His eyes focused on something near the edge of the water and softened. Jonah grabbed his vest and shook him. Sato turned back like a person, waking. He looked embarrassed and grateful and very young. The amplitude dipped and rose. The sources tested new intervals. Lena fed more of her counter lines into the water. The shapes thinned and gathered, thinned and gathered. At midnight the pumps faltered. The pressure alarm bleated. Jonah went to the cabinet for a fuse and did not return. Malik found him with one boot over the moon pool grating and his head tilted to listen. Malik dragged him back and slapped his face until Jonah cursed. "I'm sorry," Jonah said fiercely. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to my own rule." "It wants apology to turn your face toward it," Malik said. "Give it none." By 02 soccer they were spent. The crew slept. in piles while Lena and Malik rotated through the lab and moon pool. The sound eased at dawn and did not stop. Day 27 began with a weather alert, surge building from a far-off storm. Evacuation slipped another day away. Miguel set out hard candy and coffee bars since no one kept meals down. Kay taped notes over vents. No listening stations. Sato wrote checklists for everything and checked them twice. Lena discovered that when she sang her counterline softly in the lab, the hum dropped by a measurable fraction. She hated that it was her voice. She started a loop of her own notes through the hull, full time. The noise learned. It braided her, notes into its melody and almost made them pretty. At 1650, Kay disappeared between the galley and the lower stair. They found her at 1703 in the wet room near a storage locker, half-conscious, lips blue. She had chewed her earplug foam to pulp. "I fought," she said through teeth. "It said my brother's name and I fought." "You fought," Malik said. "You won until we got to you. That counts." Kay slept under observation. The room emptied. Lena took the first watch. She copied the last 6 hours of sound onto a separate drive and labeled it with time and pressure. She put it in, a pocket she could zip. At 22:10, the generator sagged. The lights dimmed. The sound outside surged in the gap and filled the station. Jonah took off down the corridor with his toolkit and a coil of wire. Malik called after him, but Jonah didn't stop. He knew the panel he had to hit to keep the station alive. He reached the machine room and through the breaker. The light steadied. The song pulled hard through the floor and rose through the grate under his boots. He swayed. The intercom crackled. It said good in Malik's voice and come in Riva's and ready in Lena's. Jonah turned his head. He knew the trick. He muttered the checklist under his breath, spoke to himself like a mechanic giving the world simple tasks. He pictured every bolt in the room. He stepped away from the grate. He didn't see the handhold by the wall move a centimeter. He grabbed it. The metal came loose, bright and sharp where it had been cut and reset. He fell, one leg through the grate, and banged, his ribs. He cursed and caught himself. He had time to be proud of himself for not dying by his own clumsiness. The song said try again in a voice that was none of theirs. Jonah looked up. Sato found him seconds later with his head at the angle of a loose hinge. He hadn't drowned. He had slipped because the handhold failed, and then the next sound had gone into him like a nail. Lena heard the pitch change in the lab and knew without the radio what had happened. She sat down on the floor. Her hands would not unclench. Enough, Malik said at the planning table an hour later. We fight now. We do not wait until it chooses each of us. We have been fighting, Lena said. Then we do it louder. They would flood the intake with noise, even if it cost the lab racks. They would power the underwater speakers at full and put out nets with weights to tangle whatever pressed close. They would tie themselves to rails and wear double protection. They would not speak unless they had to. They would keep their faces away from the water. Names, Malik said, because naming tasks makes them heavier and more real. Park on tones, Sato on nets, Miguel on power. I'll run the winches. Kay on the med station with her plugs in. Jonah. He didn't say anything more. They moved. The reveal did not come as a speech in Lena's head. It came as a set of regularities that clicked into place. The sources traveled in 3s and 5s. Their intervals drew a ladder across the water in which each rung was the right step for a human mouth. The harmonics meant human hearing and human bone and human reward, tuned on purpose. The voices in the pipes were built from recordings gathered at the hull. The water carried not only energy but intent. Sirens, then. The word landed because it was the oldest useful one. The thing outside had a shape under that word that matched. She did not say the word aloud. She held it and let the plan run. They worked by headlamp and red safe lights. They set the nets in a square around the moon pool and weighted them with spare anchors. They strung lines across the deck and around the rails. They tuned the underwater speakers and checked the power twice. On your count, Malik said. 3, Lena said. They turned it on. The station shook. The broadband roar filled the hull. The melody pressed in and skittered. The net lines tightened and twitched as if something had tested them and veered off. The intake hissed where water shoved. Through restricted openings, shapes crowded the light edge. For the first time they showed more than blur. Arms long and pale where light hit skin. Dark, wet hair. A mouth that opened too far for speech. Eyes that did not blink. The water at their shoulders broke in a pattern that was not swimming and not floating. Miguel swore in Spanish and Hawaiian and English and then stopped and breathed and stayed where he was supposed to. Kay stood at the med station with her hands on the table and stared at the wall. Sato watched the nets. One of the shapes slid up the field and put its hands on the net and shook. The weights lifted a centimeter and fell. The melody knotted around, the counterline and pulled. The net held. Again, Lena said to the speakers. The tone shifted. The melody tightened. The sources retreated and regrouped. A thin thread of song entered through the ceiling, through bolts and beams. It found Lena's right ear and tried to make a home there. She pushed it out with scale degrees and breath. The sources changed tactics. The shape at the net let go and took the melody higher. It made a line that was not words until Lena's brain supplied them. It was her father's voice on the day he told her they could see the sea from the roof of their building if they tried. It was her aunt singing a child's song off-key while washing dishes. It was an instructor telling her she could work anywhere she wanted if she kept saying yes. The world narrowed to breath and count. She sang her counterline through her teeth. Malik gripped the winch lever and stared at a bolt head as if it were a star. Sato held the nets with both fists. Something hit the hull hard enough to jolt them. Another hit. The third came as a scrape along plates that had not been touched by anything but water. The song ramped. The rack in the lab went dark and rebooted. Kay made a choked sound. She had pulled one of her plugs to listen. "I know this one," she whispered. Lena put the plug back with gentle force and Kay's eyes returned to the room. Miguel staggered. His hand went to his chest. "My mother," he said to no one. He swayed toward the edge, stopped himself, and smacked his own face. "Not yours," he told the water. "Mine, but not for you." Lena wanted to hug him for that sentence. She did not move. One of the sources found a standing wave in the moon pool and used it. The note sat in the air in the pit of the deck. It was easy to step toward because you felt the notch where your body fit. Sato's eyes unfocused. He drifted. Jonah would have caught him by the shoulders and shaken him. Jonah was gone. Lena opened her mouth and sang a note she had not meant to, sharp enough to hurt. Sato blinked and clung to the rail. "Hold," Malik said, and he sounded tired for the first time since the day began. They held. The fight lasted hours. It had long, dull stretches in which nothing happened but counting and short spikes in which everything tried to happen at once. They drank water. They breathed. They kept the tone on and the nets up. The sources pressed and peered. A face rose out of the water and watched them from the light edge. The mouth opened and closed. The eyes were wrong, set too wide or too still, and they were also correct enough to wound. At 03:30, Miguel went down clutching his chest. Kay slid to him and checked him and shook her head once. The noise in the room grew teeth as two kinds of loss occupied it. "Keep the lines," Malik said through breaths. He would say the same. They kept the lines. At 04:10, the generators coughed. 20 seconds later, the underwater speakers dropped and popped back. In the gap, the melody fell into them. Sato reached for the switch to power cycle and Lena slapped his hand. "No gaps," she said, and he nodded and rode the surge. At 05:00, the sources eased away. It was not a retreat of fear, but a quiet recalculation. Dawn grayed the sky. The sea looked ordinary. The water smelled normal, and it stung Lena to recognize that ordinariness could sit beside what she had seen. They turned, the speakers down to a bearable level. They set a watch schedule and taped new signs over hatches. They checked each other's faces when they thought the others weren't looking. At 06:12, Malik went to the generator room to change a filter he had insisted on changing twice a day. He left the door open. He did not take his headset off. He hummed Lena's counterline under his breath. He did every rule right. The ventilation duct above the panel breathed out a thread of sound. It sounded like his daughter at 3 asking for a glass of water, and at 6 asking whether stars made noise, and at 9 yelling down the hall that he had missed the bus. Malik stared at the panel until his vision doubled and steadied. The duct breathed again. It said his name. He closed his eyes and put the filter in. He put the old filter in the trash. He turned to go. The step his body chose was toward the duct. Lena saw him in the doorway and knew. She ran. She hit him shoulder first and knocked him into the corridor. The song dropped into her ear and turned her knees weak. Malik grabbed the doorframe and swore without sound. "Do not take me," he said to the duct. "You cannot raise my child." The duct did not care. They locked the room and sat on the floor. For a minute they were 2 workers who had been awake for days, and the wakefulness itself felt as dangerous as the water. "We need more hours like this morning," Malik said finally. "We need time to leave." "We can buy them," Lena said. She wanted to believe it. The want felt fragile enough to bruise. They held until noon. The sea stayed flat. The sky broke blue. The mini-sub pilot pinged them with new ETA that meant, maybe. At 13:40, Kay walked into the lab and tore the tape off the vent. "I have to hear it," she said, calm and terrible. "I fought. I win if I choose." "Kay," Lena said. Kay smiled in a way that did not look like her. "I'm so tired." She went for the moon pool. Malik grabbed her and she twisted free, with a neat shrug. She was small. She was strong. She was set on a straight path. Lena and Sato wrapped arms around her and placed her on the floor and tied her to the post with a soft strap meant for emergency splinting. Kay cried without sound. "Just a minute," she mouthed. They left her there because they had to. They sang their counterlines until their throats burned. The hours went by like stones being counted. At 17:23, the song changed key. It came down from the vents and up from the deck and laid itself on Lena's chest. She realized she had been proud of not naming them in the log, proud of the behavior that had not saved anyone. She realized she had grown sure of her voice as a weapon. She realized pride was a handle that could be used. The sound said her name in her mother's mouth, and in Riva's and in Malik's, and in the professor who had once told her that if she wanted to be in charge, she should learn to breathe at a slower rate than everyone else. It said home. It said enough work for now. It said you have done well. It said step to the edge. She gripped the rail with both hands. She named bolts out loud and watched her lips form the letters. She counted them. She counted breath. She watched her knuckles turn white and then gray. The song found a note that undid the work of bone and nerve. It sat there, persistent. It loosened her jaw. Her fingers slackened. She told them to tighten, and they did, then loosened again. She put her forehead against the post. She heard Malik call a checklist from the corridor. She heard Sato move the net lines. She heard Kay gasp, like someone who woke up underwater. She heard the generators. She heard the sea. Under that, she heard a melody so exact and generous that her chest hurt with wanting to finish it. It offered completion like a tool placed into the right hand. It lifted a piece of her life in front of her and said, "Even you can rest." Lena stepped away from the post. She took off one earmuff and then the other. The air cleared and flooded in the same second. The world sharpened. She walked to the moon pool. She could taste salt. The light made a trembling shape on the water. Somewhere, someone called her name. She did not turn. She looked down. The song was beautiful. It was built to be. It used every voice she loved and folded them together. It said the work was done. It said the problem she had brought here had been solved. It said she was a good daughter and a decent scientist and a person who had kept a station running for days even without a plan. It said the price was small. She resisted with lists and breath in the memory of Riva laughing at a stupid joke in the mess. She resisted with the shape of the station under her feet. She resisted for a time she could not count because numbers had turned slippery. Then she stopped resisting. She climbed the rail and stood above the pool. She felt the air go cool on her skin. She stepped off. The sound held her as she went down. There were shapes in the light waiting, patient and sure. Their mouths opened in welcome. She saw hair in the water and a hand and the glint of something that might have been a lens cap. She thought of the clean table in the control room where coffee had once been a luxury and not an intravenous hope. She thought of the first night. She had logged the hum and the neatness of the words she had used. The song grew brighter. She let it fill her head. She thought, I can rest, and the thought did not feel like failure. Her body made the last motions it had been taught to make. Water took her gently and completely. The station hummed. The sea did not change. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and would like more stories.